Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Sustainability-Tea-Time Podcast hosted by the University of Victoria Sustainability Project. This podcast is recorded on the homelands of the Lekwungen speaking peoples and the WSÁNEĆ peoples. Today, I'm joined by two awesome people, Maya and Emily, and we're going to be talking about UVic's Divestment Campaign. First, a little bit about myself. I am a first-year political science and environmental science student here at the University of Victoria. Now, Maya, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Maya. I'm a mixed race, queer, genderqueer, and able-bodied, uninvited settler on the unceded and homelands of the Lekwungen and WSÁNEĆ people. I am also a first-year student studying environmental studies and doing a double major with Indigenous studies.
Yeah, I'll go next. My name's Emily. I use she and her pronouns. I'm grateful to be an uninvited settler on shared and stolen Lekwungen and WSÁNEĆ territories. I'm the current director of campaigns and community relations for the UVic Student Society, and I help lead the Divest UVic campaign. So yeah, I'm really stoked for this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here with us today. So first, I just kind of wanted to ask you about what is divestment and why is it so important?
I can definitely answer that. So divestment is broadly defined as the exclusion of coal, oil, or natural gas companies whose activities, investments, or subsidiaries support the exploration, extraction, processing, and transportation of fossil fuels. So basically removing one's funds from companies affiliated with the fossil fuel industry. So that can include pipeline infrastructure and the direct extraction of fossil fuels from the ground and some others, but we won't get into that. Fossil fuel divestment is so important because when reputable organizations pull their investments from the fossil fuel industry, it begins to culturally marginalize oil, gas, and coal companies, making it harder for them to yield their political power to delay much needed climate action. So definitely divestment decisions on their own, I think amplifying those decisions play an important political role. But the act of decarbonizing one's portfolio and having those more direct and practical decarbonization actions is also super important.
Sweet, yeah. And then I guess just to contextualize it within the frameworks of UVic specifically, would you mind giving us a short summary? I know it's been a really long run and it's continuing, but just a little bit of the history of UVic's divestment.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Divest UVic campaign started on campus in 2013. It's about an 8-year campaign battle, which is pretty unprecedented in terms of UVic campaigns. But the sustained action from students and faculty has been truly remarkable. When the campaign started, there was quite a bit of uncertainty of, how much is UVic invested in fossil fuels? And there was much less financial transparency at that point. So really, this campaign has done such a fantastic job at also improving UVic's financial transparency and accountability. So they actually disclose so much more information about their investments and the exact breakdown of those investments because of that student action. So basically, over the years, we found out that UVic has two main investment pools, the working capital pool, which is managed by the Board of Governors, and then the UVic Foundation Endowment, which is considered a separate legal entity. So the recent partial divestment win basically divests the working capital pool, which is such a significant step in the right direction. However, it doesn't touch the much larger pool of money managed by the UVic Foundation. So that's sort of where we're situated. And it's been an incredibly long fight with many, many tactics leading up to that one decision. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and could you tell us a little bit about that campaign that you just part of the campaign that you won on divestment, and some of the tactics you used leading up to that win?
Yeah, I was just trying to segue right into that.
Awesome.
Perfect. Yeah. So basically, over that 8-year period, I think in the first maybe 3 to 4 years, we were definitely using softer tactics. It was a brand new campaign. We were still navigating, how much is UVic invested? What does this mean? And really that sort of 2013 period was when divestment campaigns became a thing in Canada and other parts of the world. So yeah, I think we were still really getting our feet. And it started with student petitions, letters to the Board of Governors and the foundation. And I think a really significant tactic that brought us a lot of media attention was when Divest UVic organizers took the paper petitions from students in support of divestment, folded them all into origami windmills, and made this whole display and delivered it right to a Board of Governors meeting, as this sort of direct action display of support. And I can't remember the exact number, but I think there was around 1,200 origami windmills. It was such an incredible and creative tactic that they used. And, since then, I think there was probably 8 or 10 letters to the Board of Governors over the years, and sit-ins at the Board of Governors meetings, silent action protests, not so silent action protests at those meetings. And then another tactic that got a lot of attention was, I think, in the fall of 2019, after a summer of very, very futile meetings with administrators, that just, those conversations just weren't getting anywhere. So we sort of, again, shifted to a point of escalation and decided to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do a soft blockade on the Michael Williams administration building, which is where, the president, Jamie Castles, works, and all the other sort of main decision makers on the UVic campus. So they weren't able to get into work that day, and we made, that sort of symbolic gesture about it. So that was another example of a tactic. Other rallies, demonstrations, definitely, it was a very active campaign in 2019, 2020 for sure. Then COVID hit, and this was when I was sort of coming into a leadership position on the campaign, and that definitely made things very interesting. So we did tactics like a billboard on the highway and a distanced mural protest action that sort of ushered in President Hall, who's our brand new president, and the mural read, "President Hall, time to divest." And that was, I think, a really beautiful way to showcase student support and, doing what we could during a pandemic. That sort of, I guess, summarizes a few of the key actions. And so many letters, so many, I can't even summarize all the little actions that have brought us to this point.
I guess with that is like you can really visualize how much action led up to this. But what do you think was the tipping point?
I think that's the thing about campaigns. You sit back and you wonder, what did it? What was the thing?
Totally,
and definitely the most proximate cause, I think, was the incoming of President Hall, who was quite vocal from the very beginning about his support for climate and reconciliation leadership. So we were feeling quite hopeful about that right off the bat. However, in our conversations with him, it didn't feel like there was going to be significant movement, maybe in the next 6 months. Like it was hard to sort of gauge how fast things were going to move. But in the end, I think, a key movement was there was a decarbonization working group that was having conversations about investment strategies and decarbonizing the working capital fund. So this working group was sort of formed to support the implementation of UVic's responsible investment policy, which was introduced in January of 2020. And Divest UVic sort of openly didn't support that policy because it intentionally evaded any sort of real divestment language, and instead opted for a very strange and ineffective carbon intensity approach, which we since forth have disproven as being a meaningful approach. So definitely a good thing that came out of that policy was the decarbonization working group, and having folks on that group that, very clearly understood divestment and its benefits. And from what I've heard secondhand of what happened on that working group, it seems like folks on the UVic finance side sort of came across this product of the fossil fuel free fund, and sort of pitched it as, hey, this could actually be a really easy way to decarbonize our portfolio. So that's the aha moment that I love, when divestment is actually the low hanging fruit and a really easy way to lower the carbon intensity of your portfolio.
And then you mentioned kind of before about some of the tactics you used, and one of them was direct action. And I can imagine that you got a lot of different types of responses from that. But were there any challenges you faced specifically with that? Was there a lot of pushback from the community, or was there a lot of support? What was kind of the feel around doing those actions?
Yeah, direct action was absolutely contentious and controversial. I think at that point in the campaign, it was fairly appropriate. I wasn't personally leading the campaign at that point, but from what I heard, Juliette Watts, who is the former lead organizer, she had meetings with the UVic finance team, I believe the president and other key members of the administration, over the course of the summer. And those conversations were fairly tokenized and were sort of blown off as, we're listening to students, but they had no real action items from those meetings. It was very much, okay, we're gonna pat the students on the head and send them on their way. Your feedback is being considered, thanks so much.
Give you a meeting and then you go away.
Exactly. And so that just did not feel like progress. There was no promise of real change on this front. So it felt like, direct action was just the natural point of the natural next step and point of escalation. But it was absolutely a contentious move for the campaign, particularly since Divest was sort of being sponsored by the UVic Student Society, and obviously the representatives for the UVic Student Society have to maintain really strong and positive working relationships with UVic administrators. So that definitely challenged some of those relationships. And yeah, definitely, I think it may have offended some more than others. But yeah, absolutely within the context and like with that background of having such futile and unproductive meetings, I think it made sense at the time.
And I guess another thing was we saw the divestment of UBC last year, which is another university. And so I was wondering just if that, in your personal opinion, if that contributed to the pressure that UVic felt and that maybe other universities now feel to divest.
I think UBC's divestment announcement definitely set a really great precedent. UVic is often like fairly risk adverse about being the first one to take action on any given thing, and it's not exclusive of sustainability actions. They like to do these sort of things in concert with like the big three universities in BC, which is fairly typical. I think it absolutely contributed. But, you know, when I was having conversations with administrators and bringing up the example of UBC, it never got much, you know, emotional reaction. They often play their cards pretty close to their chest. And so it was hard to tell whether or not that was, you know, something really influencing their decision. But, you know, my guess, it definitely did.
Awesome. Yeah. And then kind of another thing that I'm curious about is obviously like there's been a lot of momentum like within the divestment movement as a whole, specifically within universities. Like universities seem to be a hub for like divestment campaigns. But do you think that this has inspired like other organizations or businesses or groups to kind of promote divestment, or to be like, oh, this is like a really important thing that our organization needs to do?
I definitely think so. You know, take the example of the New York State Pension Fund. There has been major traction and movement away from fossil fuels, and post-secondary, you know, institutions has definitely played a really large role in advocating for those changes. And definitely like the student movement has kept divestment as like a key conversation point. And absolutely, that's had sort of impacts on businesses and like the private sector, as you say, as well as states and public sectors.
And then I guess like another element is just like how much we've been seeing like the rise of BLM over the summer, especially with COVID, and how those were brought to the front of a lot of media's eye. And that brings up a really crucial aspect of this campaign and of just the work that environmentalism seeks in general, and it's the aspect of intersectionality. And so I guess just like how do you make sure that your campaign and the work that you're doing provides like a more intersectional lens?
Absolutely. And I don't think there's enough conversations about intersectionality in the environmental movement. And I really appreciate how the UVic Sustainability Project has really brought that into your focus and your mandate as of late. And I think with the Divest UVic campaign, we have to really sort of focus in on the direct impacts the fossil fuel industry has on the land. And we're always going to be, like trying to support the Indigenous frontline land defenders in some capacity. And I think, that direct connection between, trying to fight against the fossil fuel industry, it always has to come back to supporting folks who in BC and Alberta who are defending their territories. So I think a good example of how our campaign is sort of lent support, I guess, was at the Wet'suwet'en solidarity actions back in early February of last year. It's so crazy. It's been a year already.
I know. It's so crazy. Yeah.
It's wild. Like we, sent our dedicated part of our campaign budget towards food and resources for the folks at the legislature, and sending and fundraising for the Frontland defenders directly on Wet'suwet'en territories. So, we understand the connection between land and promoting Indigenous land sovereignty, and, just giving our support where we can.
And so what are you Divest UVic's next goals or steps moving forward?
I'm so glad you asked. So UVic has partially divested, and we just want to make that really clear. They have not fully divested. Our next target is the UVic Foundation, and as of March 2020, they still had about 40 million in fossil fuels. Although they've lost about 9 million, specifically on their fossil fuel investments. It's honestly embarrassing.
That is so embarrassing.
They're still invested in fossil fuels. And unfortunately, despite having a portfolio dedicated to long-term investments, they don't use climate change scenario analysis to assess the financial risk of their volatile fossil fuel investments. It's just, it's a sketchy situation. So I think promoting full divestment for that portfolio, as well as just, greater financial transparency and accountability is the natural next step for this campaign. It will be challenging. I'm not going to lie to you. The foundation is not very transparent to students. We have no elected staff, faculty, or students on this board. They don't have live or public open sessions where students can ask questions. It's all through written correspondence. So it's definitely an uphill battle for the remainder of the campaign, but I think we've generated a lot of support and have still a lot of tools in our toolkit to exercise. And we're also really happy to be working in partnership with the Divest Canada Coalition, which brings together about 20 different divestment campaigns across Canada, which is just so remarkable. We're sharing resources and trying to get, a real nationwide conversation about divestment and sustaining that pressure. So it's also just so exciting and motivating to see when we get these fantastic wins, out east or in other universities in Canada, and to be working really closely with those folks. And as I mentioned earlier, another part of this campaign is providing support to Indigenous land defenders and other folks on the front lines battling the fossil fuel industry, essentially. And post divestment, what does this campaign look like? I think we'll definitely take a broader vision of climate justice and visioning, what does that look like on UVic's campus. I think there's just so much we can do. UVic tends to be very focused on operational sustainability. So, things with recycling, composting, sustainability of their buildings. Don't get me wrong, that's all great, but there's a lot more we can do to be really mobilizing our campus around a vision of climate justice and intersectional sustainability.
For sure. And I guess another question is for those who aren't necessarily in like clubs like Divest UVic, how or what would you recommend for getting involved, and how should people kind of get, I guess, just get involved? Yeah,
I mean, UVic, despite its investments and challenges in the administration, we have like so many wonderful people engaged in climate action work, and there's a ton of different ways to get involved. I'm actually going to promote the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. They have a climate action toolkit. I don't know if you want to maybe link that in the podcast somewhere, but it summarizes all the different climate action initiatives happening on the UVic campus. So that includes research opportunities, different professors who are really focused on climate work, different clubs, Divest UVic included, and the list goes on. So I really recommend checking out that resource.
Awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Emily, for talking with us today. It was so good to hear, just like more about Divest UVic and like how your campaign is really getting so much momentum. It's so exciting to hear. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you. It was great to chat, and these are all really fantastic questions. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. It was so cool to talk to Maya and Emily about the Divest campaign and all the sustainability initiatives that they have been pioneering. This episode was edited by Emma Jane Burian, and the music is by Hook Sound.